February 7, 2008, just after 7 o'clock p.m., there was an industrial disaster in Port Wentworth, Georgia. This happened at a sugar refinery called the Imperial Sugar Company, which was known for refining raw cane sugar and commercially producing granulated, powdered, and brown sugar. There were explosions and subsequent fires that resulted from incorrectly installed machinery, poorly maintained conditions, and an abundance of sugar accumulation throughout the facility. These explosions and fires unfortunately killed 14 Imperial Sugar employees and injured another 36. The repairing of the factory and the lawsuit settled by the workers who were injured and the deceased workers' families costed more than the proper protocol would have. Imperial Sugar Company was repaired and new safety precautions were implemented in the next months following the disaster. Then years later in 2012, the company was purchased by the Louis Dreyfus Group.
According to the U.S. Chemical Safety Board, there were three major causes of the chemical disaster: inadequate housekeeping standards, reported hazardous conditions were not addressed by management, and improper process machinery was installed. Inadequate housekeeping practices, significant accumulations of combustible granulated and powdered sugar resulted on the floors and elevated surfaces throughout the building. Reports of plant conditions went largely ignored by management and were not addressed appropriately. This would later provide additional fuel for secondary and tertiary fires and explosions throughout the refinery. Beneath the granulated sugar silos, sugar would pass through chutes onto a steel conveyor belt. Occasionally, sugar lumps small enough to enter the discharge chute, but too large to pass between the end of the chute and the steel belt, would create a dam, spilling sugar onto the floor. Since the tunnel was large, sugar dust never reached explosive concentrations. In 2007, however, the company enclosed the steel conveyor belt with stainless steel panels to prevent contamination. These enclosures were not equipped with a proper dust removal system. In addition, the enclosure volume was approximately 1/10 the tunnel volume. Within the reduced volume, a chute blockage caused sugar dust concentrations to go beyond the minimum explosive limit. The U.S. Chemical Safety Board determined an unknown source ignited the sugar dust, causing an explosion.
14 workers were killed and another 36 were injured. Those who were injured suffered from third-degree burns and other physical injuries caused by structural elements of the building. The pressure that was released from the explosion caused more damage to the plant and caused the collapse of the walls, stairways, and even exits. The blockage of the exits therefore created a dangerous situation where the workers were unable to escape the building. The refinery, silos, and many other buildings were heavily damaged and needed extensive restoration. The explosions resulted from a series of poorly ran operations, and if these operations were better executed, then the disaster could have been prevented. The lack of housekeeping that was performed in the refinery was a direct cause of the danger as the sugar accumulated throughout the building, making the area extremely susceptible to danger. The refinery was poorly designed for the operations it was being used for. The ignition sources were not always identified and kept separate from potential sources of flammable fuel, and there were also not many damage control procedures in place or any equipment to help in case of emergency. In addition, there were numerous reports about the unsafe practices being performed at the facility, and although management was aware of these reports, nothing was done to alter the safety protocol.
The disaster killed 14 workers and 40 at least were injured. Legacy Park Memorial were dedicated to Imperial Sugar victims when hundreds of family members were present to support each other for the loss of their loved ones. Shane George, the CEO of Memorial Health, said, "That tragic event affects us all, but none more so that the refinery employees, their families, their friends, and their loved ones. Families were hunting the company for charges, but surprisingly no federal criminal charges filed against the sugar company. As U.S. Attorney of the Southern District of Georgia included, there was no evidence that Imperial Sugar intentionally disregarded or was indifferent to plant safety standards by the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Company was rebuilt in 2009 with new safety measures to reduce the presence of sugar dust."